You've taken a deep dive into some of the side effects, and indeed, it's dark because there's a mass litigation going on right now. It's been consolidated in the state of North Carolina. And in that case, and they're going to have to prove their case, they're going to have to prove, most importantly, causality related to the vaccine. People have died. Kids, young kids, 12, 13 years old, died. Boys and girls after getting the vaccine. That's enough. It's 1 in a million, they say, but that's enough to make most parents say, and I'm out. So we'll talk about the side effects.
Well, I mean, if I could just circle back for just a second. I do agree with Dr. Walsh that it is a battle at the mucosal layer, a battle that is generally won. But interestingly enough, the studies show that the antibodies following natural infection and vaccination end up approximating each other after about a year. The battle is really not fought systemically. So we are also neglecting to talk about the T cells and their involvement in protecting us against, the HPV 16 and 18, which are the worst. There are 9 that Gardasil protects against, but there are 12 oncogenic strains, meaning cancer-causing strains. And so we're just not really talking about the full picture that our immune system provides as far as protection for us. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that studies have looked at the protection of natural immunity and actually using the control group in a trial in Costa Rica and found that there was 50% protection against neoplasias that do lead to cancer. So cervical intraepithelial neoplasia 2 or higher, CIN 2 or higher.
I don't understand a word you're saying.
So yeah, I understand. So those are precancers. So, but if your audience is trying to look up these studies and understand what CIN is, it took me a little bit to figure that out. So CIN is precancers, and the grading is 1, 2, and 3. 3 is worse. So what we're trying to do is measure outcomes that are meaningful, and the outcomes that are meaningful are cancer. And so CIN3 leads to cervical cancer a fraction of the time, somewhere between 0.5% and 4% within 12 months. Not all of the CIN3s even lead to cancer. So again, I just think full disclosure to parents is important about the full spectrum of, potential risks. And getting to your point, Megyn, about side effects, the side effects that they are talking about for this vaccine, beyond what the CDC acknowledges, which is anaphylaxis, which is 26 per million, syncope, which is fainting, is 82 per million. CDC admits in its own studies that those are much higher than other vaccines. Clotting is about 2 per million. I think those are some things that really, if we were smart about reducing harms and really optimizing the benefit, I think that it would make sense to talk about risk factors for clotting. So family risk factors, hereditary risk factors, even using birth control are risk factors for clotting. Those potentially could be conversations that you could have. You could run a blood test before you give the vaccine. And finally, probably the most obvious thing we should talk about is, do we really need 2 doses or 3 doses, as you mentioned earlier, Megyn, depending on age? So the World Health Organization just released in November 2022 an updated recommendation acknowledging that the evidence is very good for the protection of 1 dose as far as antibodies as well as long-term outcomes. So, the option exists for what they call an off-label 1-dose recommendation. And I think parents should be informed of that. But here in the US, we're just simply not talking about it. CDC, ACIP, AAP, even in the AAP's Red Book, it still says the routine, on label 2 or 3 doses. And as a matter of fact, I was really surprised to find that they even say, hey, if the interval is too short between any of the doses, you should restart, which is frankly just crazy. There's no reason I would ever advise anyone to do that, because the longer the interval, the better, which we found with COVID too. So maybe Red Book's in the middle of revising that. I don't know. I found it and it struck me as, yet another indication that we're not really providing parents in the US with full disclosure. And I apologize.
There's a lot I want to go. There's a lot I want to go over there, and also give it back to Dr. Walsh in a second. But let me just ask you: the reason some believe they're having adverse reactions to this vaccine is in this vaccine, as I understand it, there's a form of aluminum. It's like a special form of aluminum that Merck dreamed up, and we've had RFK Jr. on this show repeatedly to talk about how he has nothing against certain vaccines. What he does have against certain vaccines is when they put mercury in them or as a preservative, or when they put aluminum in them. Mm-hmm. And that he says it's a neurotoxin. And I think we can agree that it's a neurotoxin. I don't think even his critics would dispute that aluminum is a neurotoxin. But there's also something in there that helps it cross the blood-brain barrier. So there's something in this vaccine that helps it cross the blood-brain barrier, according to what I read, And it also has this form of aluminum. So now you're basically injecting aluminum into your kid's brain and trying to make it as easy as possible, which is, I believe, why some think we get a high percentage of adverse reactions to Gardasil. Is that correct?
Well, it's somewhat correct. I would say that, aluminum has been used for, a very, very long time as an adjuvant to get the attention of the immune system. And that's not really very shocking. I think the difference with this Merck AAHS, which is a different one, I'm not going to say the full word, but AAHS is their adjuvant. It is a proprietary adjuvant, and it was used. The thing that frustrates me most probably about this is the clinical trials are not all that helpful. So they enrolled a good number of people, up to 18,000 if you look across all the studies, but it was an active comparator. Only 306 had a saline placebo. The rest of them had this adjuvant, which we know may cause harms, because looking at the adverse event rates, they're roughly comparable between vaccine and placebo, which tells you that adjuvant is not terribly safe. So I do wish that the trials had been done better.
Wait, just to clear that up, because the placebo had the adjuvant in it. It just didn't have the thing that prevents HPV.
Right. It didn't have the little VLPs, the virus-like particles. So
that's the worst case scenario. So you don't even get the cancer-causing thing if you're in the placebo group, and you get the aluminum thing.
Right.
And then what I heard, Allie, is that then post that, because the trial participants were like, hey, the people who got the actual drug, they're not going to get cancer. You were in the placebo drug group. And so those people were like, oh, give me the real deal. So then they had 4, maybe 6 shots of a shot that had the aluminum in it, which I'd be very upset if I were in the placebo group and later found out, holy shit, how much aluminum did they stick in me? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. Merck's own package insert shows that roughly 2.3% in both the vaccine and the placebo group had new onset autoimmune issues. Like, I had to read that twice. 2.3% is a big deal. So I just wish that the FDA oversight was more stringent. I wish that they weren't allowed to do active comparators. I wish that they had been forced to publish every single study. I wish that people had not had to invest 3 years of their lives combing through, clinical study reports and, petitioning the manufacturers to release data so that we could actually do the proper meta-analyses to look at these adverse events. It's just really very frustrating to try to get to the bottom of the equation, which matters, which is risk versus benefit. And I don't feel, as an epidemiologist who, cut my teeth on this during COVID, looking at myocarditis, I don't feel like I have enough data to really fairly square this up.
I know, that's the search. So, Kristen, can you speak to what Allie was just saying? She challenged you on your statements about the immunity is really not that great from catching one of these early HPV strains. You were suggesting I wouldn't rely on it. And she was saying it's stronger than you're stating, and don't forget about T cells.
I mean, when you guys approached me about coming on about this topic, I really tried to sort of start from zero. Like, I didn't know anything about this vaccine. I went to all sort of the top quality medical journals and pulled a bunch of studies on safety and efficacy. So this one is the International Journal of Gynecological Cancers. And what they say about that is the natural immune response for HPV is insufficient to control for new infections and is far lower when compared with the high levels of seroresponse and the high efficacy observed against persistent infections after HPV vaccination. And I saw that across like 5 or 6 different papers that I looked at. And I was really looking at the big summary, papers, the meta-analysis. And I see this over and over. So I'm the first to tell you, like I said, I think natural immunity works great for some things, not so great for others. Works great for chickenpox. That's why we don't make kids get the chickenpox vaccine if they've had chickenpox. But natural immunity to the flu is pretty crummy, which is why I personally choose to get a flu vaccine every year. And I think HPV is one of the ones that it just doesn't work that great. And the vaccine works so much better. And regarding the aluminum, I think some of this is unavoidable because vaccines, what do? They stimulate the immune system, right? So they're teaching your immune system to fight off these diseases without you getting sick or dying. So it's sort of like if we don't want vaccines that have any adverse events whatsoever, or adverse effects or side effects, or not one tiny unpleasant thing happens, I think it's sort of like sending a bunch of military recruits to West Point and being like, but we don't want them to get any bruises, okay? Like, it's not very realistic. I don't like the oversimplified analogies, which we saw so many of during COVID, sort of humanizing viruses, but the immune system is like, it's there to fight off nasty little microbes who want to infect you. So I think, we do have the technology, which is so great. I mean, vaccines are pretty much, one of the greatest public health interventions of all time, like somewhere behind clean water and, clean sewers and stuff. But you do have to stimulate the immune system for a vaccine to work. The same it goes for measles vaccine. All the vaccines have to do that. And that's why I think, as far as some of the stuff RFK Jr. says, there's some problems with that. Everything should be up against a saline placebo. It's hard to do a blinded trial that way because, pretty much everybody's going to know that all they got was saline if nobody, ever gets any soreness in the injection site so that's one problem. But also, if you're talking about going back and redoing a bunch of safety trials, it's not ethical to compare, a vaccine that's known to be pretty well safe and effective, which is the standard of care, against a placebo that's not the standard of care for diseases that we know are already killing people. So, you can talk about, and this is not my area, but you can talk about what should be the placebo for a brand new vaccine that we don't already have a standard of care for. But I don't know, I try to, I'm a general pediatrician, whatever brand Merck is using, I will tell you this, everything is proprietary with the pharma companies. They are constantly updating vaccines. They're constantly updating adjuvants. They're constantly updating everything. So I don't know anything about that particular, brand of aluminum, but I do know that kind of aluminum's in everything. I think probably Allie would acknowledge this too. We all eat 7 to 9 milligrams of aluminum each day. It's found in antacids, aspirin, antiperspirants. So we all get a lot of exposure to aluminum. It's one of the elements in the Earth's crust. Your immune system doesn't necessarily differentiate whether you ate it or, it was injected.
Like many people, I am trying to eat healthier these days, and that's why I love good olive oil. When I've been making my salad dressings, I've been doing that. That's the one thing I'll do. I can cook that. I have found that the difference between the olive oil, like if you use an old one, an unfresh one, you can taste it big time. This matters. Good in the field of olive oil means fresh, okay? Olive oil packs the most flavor and healthiest nutrients when it's fresh from the farm. But that's the problem with the supermarket olive oils. They're not fresh. They can sit on that shelf for many, many months. You have no idea how long, growing stale. This is why I like my olive oil direct from small, award-winning farms, thanks to a guy named TJ Robinson, also known as the Olive Oil Hunter. When I tasted TJ's farm fresh oils, I fell in love with their vibrant, grassy flavors. They're delicious on salad, veggies, pasta, meat, fish, you name it. As an introduction to his fresh pressed olive oil club, TJ's willing to send you a full-size $39 bottle of one of the world's finest artisanal olive oils for just $1 to help him cover shipping. Best of all, there's never a commitment to buy anything, and you can cancel your membership at any time. Get your free $39 bottle for just $1 in shipping and taste the difference freshness makes. Go to harvestfreshnow.com, harvestfreshnow.com for a free bottle and pay just $1 in shipping, harvestfreshnow.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.